If you've ever looked at a photograph of a Southern Pacific locomotive and felt like something was wrong, you weren't imagining it. Everything about the machine is reversed. The cab rides at the front, the smokestack sits at the back, and the whole locomotive looks like it rolled off the assembly line facing the wrong way. But Southern Pacific didn't build 256 of these backwards locomotives by accident. So why did a major American railroad spend 35 years building steam engines that defied every rule of conventional design? This story doesn't start with a locomotive. It starts with a mountain range that nearly defeated the first transcontinental railroad before the tracks were even finished. In the 1860s, the Central Pacific Railroad faced the Sierra Nevada, a wall of granite rising over 7,000 feet between Sacramento and the rest of the continent. Grades reached 2.5% in places, and building through the range meant carving tunnels by hand through solid rock. Chinese laborers, who made up over 90% of the Central Pacific workforce, worked 3 shifts around the clock and managed roughly 14 inches of tunnel progress per day. Summit Tunnel alone, the longest on the route, stretched 1,659 feet beneath the mountain. It took more than 15 months to complete. By the time the Sierra Crossing was finished, the route featured 39 tunnels through granite. But the tunnels weren't the only problem. The Sierra Nevada receives some of the heaviest snowfall anywhere in North America. In the winters of the late 1860s, entire trains were buried on the tracks. During one storm, passengers stranded for 6 days were eventually told to walk through the snow to the nearest station, miles away, without proper clothing. After that winter, the Central Pacific began constructing snow sheds, massive wooden structures that covered the railroad tracks like enclosed corridors. They eventually stretched for nearly 40 miles along the mountain crossing, built from 65 million board feet of lumber and 900 tons of bolts and spikes. Thousands of railroad workers maintained the snowshed structures year-round, watching for fires, clearing collapsed timbers, and replacing rotting lumber along the mountain route. The sheds sat in the summer sun like kindling, a constant fire hazard, and the weight of accumulating winter snow could crush them. But they kept the tracks open, and that was what mattered. However, the real problem with the snow sheds would not become clear for another 40 years. Here's the detail that everyone missed at the time. The snow sheds solved the snow problem, but they created a new one. By enclosing the tracks mile after mile, they would essentially have turned the Sierra Crossing into a 40-mile-long tunnel. Now picture a conventional steam locomotive hauling heavy freight uphill through one of those enclosed wooden sheds. The boiler is working at full capacity, thick exhaust hammering out of the smokestack at high velocity. In open air on the California plains, that smoke rises and dissipates within seconds. Inside a snow shed, it has nowhere to go. The exhaust rolls backward along the wooden ceiling and settles around the locomotive in a choking cloud. On a conventional steam engine, the cab sits behind the boiler, at the very back. That means the engineer and the firemen are sitting in the worst possible spot, surrounded by carbon monoxide, soot, and suffocating heat, unable to see the track through the haze. So what do you do when the very structure built to protect the railroad is slowly poisoning the people who run it? On a short shed, the crew could hold their breath and push through. On a stretch that ran for miles, they could not. And as locomotives grew larger and burned more fuel through the early 1900s, the exhaust fumes only got worse. This situation became a full-blown crisis in 1908 when Southern Pacific ordered 2 massive 2882 mallet compound locomotives from the Baldwin Locomotive Works. Classified MC1 and numbered 4000 and 4001, these engines were built specifically to conquer the punishing grades of the Sacramento Division, a 150-mile stretch of main line through the Sierra Nevada. On their first uphill trial runs through the snow sheds and tunnels, 2 problems surfaced immediately. First, the stack exhaust velocity was so intense that it blew the roof boards right off the wooden snow sheds. Southern Pacific handled that with a relatively simple fix: stack splitters. These were metal deflectors mounted above the smokestack that directed the exhaust sideways instead of straight up, sparing the shed timbers. The second problem was not so easy to solve. The sheer volume of exhaust gases inside the enclosed sheds and tunnels nearly asphyxiated the locomotive crews. Southern Pacific tried gas masks. They tried cotton waste soaked in water for the crews to breathe through while they worked the throttle and tended the fire. None of it was practical. You cannot run a locomotive for hours over the Sierra while breathing through a wet rag. And this was not some rare event. Heavy freight service over the Sierra was the backbone of Southern Pacific's operation, running day after day. In every season. So how do you keep a railroad running when the route itself is trying to kill your crews? What comes next is the part that still surprises anyone who hears it for the first time. Not long after those MC-1 locomotives entered service on the Sierra route, one engineer decided to take matters into his own hands. He ran his locomotive onto a turntable, turned the whole machine around, and operated it backward through the tunnels and snow sheds. The tender led the way. The cab now faced the front of the train. And the smokestack, the source of all that lethal exhaust, trailed at the back where the fumes poured harmlessly out behind the consist. It worked. The crew could breathe clean mountain air for the first time on a Sierra run. But running a locomotive backward through the mountains introduced new hazards. The tender, a massive rectangular tank of water and oil, blocked the engineer's view of the track ahead. Signal boards designed to be visible from the right side of a forward-facing cab now appeared on the wrong side. In the event of a head-on collision, the crew had nothing between them and the impact. At least one fatal accident resulted from this improvised arrangement when a moving locomotive struck a flat car on the Modoc line near Herlong, California. So the crews were trapped between two impossible choices. Face forward in the conventional arrangement and risk suffocation inside the tunnels. Face backward with the tender leading and risk a collision you cannot see coming. Southern Pacific's mechanical engineering department recognized that the improvised backward running had revealed a genuine solution, but it needed to be made permanent and safe. Their proposal was elegant in concept, even if the resulting locomotive looked bizarre rolling down the tracks. Take the entire locomotive, minus the tender, and rotate it 180 degrees. Put the cab at the front by design, with unobstructed visibility down the track. Position the firebox ahead of the driving wheels, and let the smokestack sit at the rear, far from the crew. The single factor that made this whole arrangement possible was oil. Southern Pacific operated across California and the American Southwest, where petroleum was cheap and abundant, while coal was scarce. A conventional coal-fired locomotive requires the fireman to shovel fuel by hand from the tender directly into the firebox. That only works when the tender sits immediately behind the cab. But with oil as the fuel source, Southern Pacific's engineers could pipe it through lines running the full length of the locomotive, from the tender at the rear to the burner at the front. They sealed the oil bunker in the tender airtight and pressurized it with compressed air from the main reservoir, ensuring a constant fuel flow even on the steepest mountain grades. No coal-burning railroad could have built a cab-forward locomotive. This design was only possible because Southern Pacific burned oil. The first purpose-built cab-forward mallets, classified MC2, entered service in 1910. Crews were skeptical at first. Sitting at the very front of a massive articulated locomotive with nothing between them and the rails, felt dangerously exposed. But after their first runs through the Sierra tunnels, breathing clean air with a clear view of every curve and signal ahead, those same crews became the cab-forward's fiercest defenders. They did not want to go back. Southern Pacific kept ordering more. Over the next 3.5 decades, Baldwin Locomotive Works delivered generation after generation of refined cab-forward designs to the railroad's shops in Sacramento. The early MC classes used the compound mallet arrangement, with high-pressure and low-pressure cylinders working in sequence for maximum efficiency at low speeds. Starting in 1928, Southern Pacific shifted to simple articulation with the AC classes, where all 4 cylinders operated at the same steam pressure. This made the locomotives faster, more responsive, and better suited to the increasing speed demands of mainline freight and passenger service across the Sierra. The cab forwards were not just used on Donner Pass either. Southern Pacific deployed them on every mountain route in its system. Cab forwards hauled freight over the Cascade Line between Dunsmuir and Portland, on the Tehachapi Pass, where the track loops over itself in a famous spiral of tunnels and curves. They climbed grades that would stall lesser engines. And on the Modoc Line through the volcanic landscape of northeastern California, they ran through remote territory where no other articulated locomotive could have kept crews safe. Wherever the terrain funneled smoke back into an enclosed space, the cab-forward design earned its keep. But could you spot one from a distance? These locomotives also carried distinctive visual details that set them apart from anything else on American rails. Stack splitters sat above the smokestack to protect snow-shed roofs. Drifting valves perched on top of the cylinders. A large Southern Pacific emblem rode on the side of the tender, visible to every farmer, rancher, and trackside spectator as the machine rolled past. The cab forward didn't just solve a ventilation problem, it gave the railroad an identity. If you're finding value in this story, hit subscribe. I cover the forgotten engineering behind railroad history every week. But just how far could the cab forward design go? By the early 1940s, the cab forward had evolved into something extraordinary. The final AC-12 class, ordered during World War II, represented the pinnacle of the design. 20 locomotives, numbered 4,275 through 4,294, rolled out of the Baldwin shops between October 1943 and March 1944. Each one weighed over 650,000 pounds without the tender. With the tender loaded, the total weight exceeded 1 million pounds of steel, iron, and machinery riding on 16 driving wheels. Those drivers stood 63.5 inches tall, and each locomotive could generate 124,300 pounds of tractive effort. These were among the most capable steam locomotives anywhere in North America, hauling wartime freight over the same Sierra grades that had nearly suffocated their predecessors 30 years earlier. The wartime demand was relentless. Military supplies, fuel, food, and equipment flowed west toward Pacific ports, and the Sierra Nevada sat directly in the path. Cab forwards worked around the clock through the mountain tunnels and snow sheds, their crews breathing clean air, while conventional steam locomotives on other railroads still choked their engine crews with fumes. Southern Pacific's entire fleet of 256 cab forwards was the largest collection of articulated steam power on any American railroad, dwarfing even Union Pacific's famous roster of 25 big boy locomotives. But here's the question that railroad historians have debated for decades. If the cab forward design worked so well for Southern Pacific, why didn't anyone else build them? It came down to trade-offs. The cab forward solved Southern Pacific's specific problem brilliantly, but it carried risks that most other railroads weren't willing to accept. Crews sat completely exposed at the front of the locomotive. In any head-on collision or grade crossing accident, the engineer and fireman would take the full impact, with no boiler mass to shield them, and the oil lines created their own danger. Because the firebox sat ahead of the driving wheels instead of behind them, any oil leak could drip onto the rails directly beneath the locomotive and cause the wheels to slip. Most of the time, this was a minor nuisance. In at least one case, it proved fatal. In 1941, a cab forward with a leaking cylinder cock entered the tunnel at Santa Susana Pass near Los Angeles. The tunnel sat on a grade, and as the heavy train crawled uphill, water on the rails from the leak caused the driving wheels to spin and lose traction. The train stalled inside the tunnel. A coupler knuckle broke under the strain, separating the airline and triggering an emergency brake application. The cab forward sat trapped in a tunnel filling with exhaust and steam. Then oil dripping from the lines ignited beneath the cab floor. The crew did not survive, but Southern Pacific was not the only railroad wrestling with tunnel ventilation. Most other railroads looked at incidents like these and chose different paths across their mountain territory entirely. The Great Northern electrified portions of its Cascade Tunnel route in Washington state. The Milwaukee Road electrified hundreds of miles across Montana and Idaho. Canadian Pacific's engineers drafted preliminary designs for a cab-forward version of their Selkirk locomotive, but abandoned the project once diesel power made the entire question irrelevant. Southern Pacific, with its unique combination of extreme mountain geography and oil-burning infrastructure, remained the only railroad where the cab-forward made more practical sense than any alternative. And then the diesel locomotive arrived, and it did not just match the cab-forward. It made the entire concept unnecessary. A diesel engine produces no smokestack exhaust, does not need a firebox, and it puts the crew at the front by default, with full visibility in both directions. Everything the cab-forward had been engineered to accomplish, the diesel accomplished with none of the design compromises. Southern Pacific began retiring its cab-forwards through the mid-1950s. On November 30th, 1956, Locomotive 4211 hauled a freight train from Oakland to Davis, and then on to the Roseville yard with just a caboose trailing behind. It was the last revenue run of any cab-forward locomotive. But the story does not quite end there. In November 1957, Southern Pacific brought Locomotive 4274 out of storage for one final trip over Donner Pass, the very mountain route that had created the need for cab-forward locomotives half a century earlier. A 10-car excursion train climbed the steep grade from Sacramento to Sparks, Nevada, with photographers and rail fans stationed at remote turnouts along the Sierra crossing to capture every moment. When the excursion was finished, 4274 was retired and scrapped the same year. Of the 256 cab-forward locomotives that Southern Pacific built over 35 years, 255 were cut apart and melted for scrap metal. Scrapped number 4294, the very last cab-forward ever built, an AC-12 class locomotive completed by Baldwin in March 1944. Only one survived. Southern Pacific donated it to the city of Sacramento, and today it stands indoors at the California State Railroad Museum, preserved exactly as it appeared in revenue service. In 1981, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers designated it a National Historic Mechanical Engineering Landmark. Visitors can walk up beside it and look at the cab sitting right there at the front of the locomotive, positioned where no steam engine cab was ever supposed to go. The cab-forward was not a universal solution. It was a specific answer to a specific problem, born from a mountain range that filled its own tunnels and snow sheds with lethal fumes. Southern Pacific did not build its locomotives backward because it wanted to stand out. It built them backward because the Sierra Nevada left no other choice. And in that act of practical desperation, the railroad created one of the most distinctive locomotives in the history of American railroading. The wooden snow sheds of Donner Pass are mostly gone now, replaced by concrete structures or torn down entirely. But the granite tunnels still stand. And if you ever hike through one on a quiet afternoon, with the rock walls pressing in close and the daylight shrinking to a distant point behind you, you might begin to understand why one engineer, a century ago, turned his locomotive around on a turntable and refused to face backward through that darkness ever again.